Welcome to Relative Our Family Mess. This is a dedicated space where we explore the deeper dimensions of life, focusing on true strength, timeless resilience, and the compelling stories that shape a man's journey. If you appreciate substantive, impactful content and refined perspectives, you are in the right place. Without further ado, I welcome you to today's new video. 17 years ago, my younger brother dropped his 11-year-old son on my doorstep, told me he would be back in 2 weeks, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. This morning, he walked into my lawyer's office in an expensive suit, sat down across from the son he abandoned, and told the room he was the only real family the boy had ever had. What Marcus didn't know was that I was sitting 12 feet away behind a wall that wasn't on any floor, plan, listening to every word. The room I was sitting in had no official existence. Maggie Chen had it built into the original renovation 23 years ago, back when she handled enough sensitive cases that a private observation space made practical sense. She mentioned it to me once, offhand. The way you mention something you assume will never matter. I filed it away and said nothing. That was 9 years ago. I had been sitting in that chair since 8:45 in the morning. My coffee was still hot. I had learned from the version of this morning I had been rehearsing in my head for 18 months that the details you can control are worth controlling. On the monitor in front of me, the conference room was filling up. Daniel and Ava arrived first, at 9:40. He came through the door the way he did everything without announcement, without performance, simply present. He was 28 years old and carried himself like a man who had learned early that composure was not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. I had watched him develop that quality over 17 years, and I was not going to pretend I wasn't proud of it. Ava walked half a step behind him, close enough to matter. Far enough to give him the room the morning required. They sat without discussion. Daniel at the head of the table, Ava to his right. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't need to. I watched Daniel's hands on the table. Flat. Still. The hands of a man who had decided how he was going to hold himself, and was holding himself exactly that way. Victor Huang came through the side entrance at 9:56. He was alone, which I had expected. He had spent 28 years understanding that optics were a form of argument, and the optic he wanted this morning was independence rather than coordination. He took the chair across from where Marcus would sit, set his pen on the table, and began turning it over in his fingers. I had watched Victor turn that pen in meetings for nearly 3 decades. It was his tell the specific physical behavior he defaulted to when he was managing something he could not fully control. I noted it and moved on. Marcus arrived at 9:52 with Patrick Doyle half a step behind him. He had aged in the way men age when the choices they have been making have finally begun to compound, not badly, but with a kind of compressed tension around the eyes that suggested the math was no longer working in his favor. He was wearing the suit from our father's funeral. I recognized it by the cut of the left shoulder. He had kept it for significant occasions. That told me everything I needed to know about how he had decided to play the morning. Marcus looked at Daniel the moment he walked in. Daniel looked back. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds and contained 17 years of history. Marcus had left an 11-year-old boy on a doorstep in August 2007. Daniel had grown into the person sitting at the head of that table. The distance between those two facts was not something either of them was going to resolve in 4 seconds. But 4 seconds was enough to establish that both of them understood it. Diane Walsh came in at 9:58 with Noah at her side. The boy was 10 years old, wearing a collared shirt that had been ironed that morning. Diane guided him to 2 chairs along the side wall, said something quietly to him, something brief, something that settled him and sat. She did not look at Marco. Marcus looked at her, his jaw tightened by a fraction. Doyle leaned over and said something low. Marcus shook his head once. Maggie entered at exactly 10 o'clock. She set her folder on the table, adjusted her chair, and looked around the room with the measured attention of someone taking inventory. She confirmed the recording, asked for objections. Doyle made a note on the record. Maggie acknowledged it without looking up. Then she opened the folder. The room went quiet. Marcus's hands on the table were still the hands of a man who had rehearsed patience. Victor's pen had slowed its rotation. Daniel had not moved since he sat down. He was looking at Maggie with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly what was coming and had already decided it would not move him. Then Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair and said, with the particular casualness of a man who had been practicing the line for weeks, that he was the only real family Daniel had ever had. He said it like it cost him nothing, because for Marcus, it didn't. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. They thought I was too weak to walk into that room. That was the last mistake they would ever make about me. I had time to think. That was fine. I had spent the better part of 64 years thinking, and I had gotten reasonably good at it. I thought about the first truck. It was a 1989 Ford F-250. White, with a crack along the passenger side mirror that I had taped over with electrical tape and never bothered to fix. I bought it in the spring of that year with $11,000 I had saved over 8 years of welding for other men who built things well and charged fairly, and still somehow managed to treat the people who worked for them as interchangeable parts. I had decided at 31 that I was done being an interchangeable part. Coal Industrial Supply started as exactly that, a supply operation. Not construction, not contracting, just materials. Steel plate, structural beams, rebar, industrial fixtures. I drove that truck 6 days a week across Cook County, building relationships with site managers and project foremen, learning which contractors paid on time and which ones would leave you short on a Friday afternoon. I was not a fast learner in the classroom sense. I was a fast learner in the sense that I paid attention and did not make the same mistake twice, which in my experience is a more useful skill. Within 3 years, I had 2 trucks and a leased warehouse on Cermak Road. I was sleeping less than 5 hours a night, and I did not complain about it, because complaining requires energy better spent elsewhere. Joe Briggs found me in the summer of 1981, before any of this. I was 23 years old and had just started at a fabrication shop on the South Side, and Joe was 54 and had been welding steel since before I was born. He was not a man who wasted words. He watched me work for 3 days before he said anything. And when he finally spoke, it was not to compliment me or critique me. He just said, steady and even, "That steel doesn't break. It bends the right amount and comes back." He said a man who understood that about steel usually understood it about himself too. Eventually, I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. I still think about it. Joe retired in 1997. I visited him every month after that, through 3 different apartments, and eventually the care facility in Evanston, where he had been living for the past 4 years. We talked about the bears and the weather, and occasionally about the kind of things 2 men talk about when one of them is running out of time, and the other one knows it. He was 78 years old now, and his hand shook when he poured coffee, but his eyes were the same, steady, attentive, missing nothing. Victor Huang walked into my office in the spring of 1993. He was 42 years old, well-dressed, with the kind of handshake that communicates competence before the conversation starts. He had spent 12 years in commercial real estate and was looking, he said, for something with more substance. What he meant, though, it took me a few years to fully understand it, was that he wanted something he could eventually own a piece of. I gave him a job managing client accounts. Within 18 months, he had doubled our commercial contract volume. He was good at what he did. I want to be precise about that. Victor Huang was genuinely good at his work, and the 28 years we built together were not nothing. We landed the first city contract in 1996, a supply agreement with the Chicago Department of Buildings that ran for 12 consecutive years. We expanded into 3 counties. We hired 47 people who came to work because they knew we would not leave them short on a Friday afternoon. All of that was real. All of that mattered. It does not change what he did later, but it matters that I say it clearly. Because what comes next is going to be difficult enough without pretending the good years did not happen. I spent 28 years building something real with Victor Huang. I spent the last 2 of those years watching him dismantle it, piece by piece from the inside. And I did not move fast enough to stop it before the damage was done. That was my mistake, not trusting him. Trusting him past the point where the evidence said I should stop. I had made that mistake before. With Marcus, I had made it for 40 years, on the monitor. Victor was still turning his pen over in his fingers. Slow rotations. The rhythm of a man running numbers and not arriving at a total he liked. I had watched him do that in meetings for nearly 3 decades. I knew exactly what it meant. I knew exactly what was coming for him, too. Marcus came to see me for the first time in 1998. He was 31 years old and already operating in the particular way of a man who has learned that charm is a more efficient resource than effort. He sat across from my desk, smiled the smile I had known since we were children, and told me he had a business opportunity in Detroit that needed seed capital. $15,000. He would have it back to me within 6 months. I gave him $10,000. He paid back $3,000. He came back in 2001. Then 2003. Each time the number was larger, the story more elaborate, the timeline for repayment more optimistic. Each time I gave him something less than he asked, and more than I should have. The total across all of those years, if you added it up carefully, came to somewhere north of $80,000. I did not add it up carefully for a long time, because adding it up carefully would have required me to look at what the number meant. The 2004 request was the one that should have ended it. Marcus called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said his wife, Sandra, was sick. Serious, he said. The kind of sick that required specialists and treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. He needed $40,000. He had nowhere else to turn. I wired him $25,000 within 48 hours because Sandra was my sister-in-law, and because I knew what it felt like to watch someone you loved need something you couldn't provide. 6 months later, I ran into a man who knew Marcus through a mutual contact in Detroit. He asked how Sandra was doing. I said I understood she had been ill. The man looked at me with a particular expression, the expression of someone realizing a conversation has taken an unexpected turn, and told me that Sandra had been perfectly healthy as far as he knew. Had been for years. I drove home that evening and sat in my kitchen for a long time. I did not call Marcus. I did not confront him. I simply sat with the understanding that had been building for years and had now arrived at a place where I could no longer pretend it hadn't. I gave him money after that, too. Not because I didn't know what he was, but because Marcus was the only family I had left after our parents passed. I understood, in a way I had never fully articulated even to myself, what it felt like to need something from people who were under no obligation to give it. That understanding had cost me a great deal over the years. It would eventually save Daniel. Marcus called on a Friday evening in August of 2007. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly numbers when my phone rang. I saw his name on the screen and answered, because I always answered, which was one of the things about myself I was still in the process of correcting. "I need you to watch Daniel for a couple of weeks," he said. No greeting, no preamble, just the sentence, delivered with the casual certainty of a man who had never seriously considered the possibility of being told no. "I've got some business in Detroit I need to sort out. He'll be fine. He's a good kid." I asked when he was bringing Daniel by. There was a brief pause. Then Marcus said he was actually already there. I stood up from my desk and walked to the front window. A car I didn't recognize was idling at the curb. Standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, in the August dark, was a boy with a single canvas backpack hanging from one shoulder. He was thin and still, and looking up at my front door with the particular attention of a child who has learned that environments can change without warning, and that the only reliable response is to observe everything carefully before committing to anything. The car pulled away from the curb before I reached the front door. Marcus did not wave. I opened the door. The boy looked up at me, He had his father's jawline and eyes that were doing the work of taking in everything about me at once: my height, my expression, the light behind me in the hallway, the distance between us. "What's your name?" I asked. "Daniel," he said. I stepped back from the door. "Come on in." "Daniel." He came in. He left his shoes by the mat without being asked, which told me someone had taught him to do that somewhere, at some point, in some house that had rules worth following. He stood in my hallway with his backpack still on his shoulder and looked at the kitchen and the living room and the staircase with the same careful, cataloging attention he had turned on me at the door. "Are you hungry?" I asked. He was quiet for exactly 1 second. The hesitation of a child who has been taught that wanting things leads to disappointment, and who is deciding whether this particular situation is safe enough to want something in. Then he said, "Yes." "Sir." I fed him. I showed him the guest room. I told him to leave his shoes by the door in the morning because the floors had just been cleaned. Then I went back to my desk and picked up the phone and called Marcus 4 times before I gave up. He answered once. 2 days later, from a number I didn't recognize. He said he would explain everything when he got back. Then the call stopped being answered. The explanations never came. Marcus was gone. Daniel was standing in my kitchen eating cereal at 7 in the morning, watching me with those careful eyes. And the 2 weeks Marcus had promised stretched out ahead of us into something that neither of us could see the end of yet. 2 weeks became a month. A month became 3. By November, I had called Marcus 14 times across 4 different numbers and reached him twice, once on a prepaid phone he picked up by accident, once on a number that was disconnected the following day. Both conversations lasted under 3 minutes. Both ended with him saying he would explain everything when he got back. He did not get back. Victor's reaction when I told him what was happening was immediate and practical. "You can't keep someone else's kid indefinitely," he said. "You're 61 years old, and you run an industrial supply company." "What are you doing?" I said I was making sure Daniel didn't go into the foster system. Victor looked at me the way he looked at business decisions he considered irrational, with a kind of controlled frustration that never quite made it to his face, but lived around the edges of it. He dropped the subject. He brought it up again twice over the following months, and dropped it both times when I didn't engage. I called Maggie Chen in October. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her best qualities. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. The first was practical. How long had Daniel been in my care without formal documentation? The second was more pointed. What did I want the outcome to be? "I want him to stay," I said, "permanently. Then we need to start the process," she said. Connecticut requires termination of parental rights before an adoption can proceed. Given what you've described, we have grounds for abandonment. It won't be simple. Most things worth doing aren't. Come in Thursday. I told Daniel the following Sunday morning. We were at the kitchen table. He was eating cereal. I was drinking coffee. The radio was on low in the background the way I kept it on Sunday mornings. I had been trying to find the right moment for 2 weeks, and had concluded there was no right moment. Only the moment you decided to stop waiting for one. I want to talk to you about something, I said. He looked up from his bowl. I've been speaking with a lawyer, I said, about making your living here permanent. If that's something you want. He was quiet for a moment. Not the hesitation of uncertainty. I had learned the difference in 3 months between Daniel thinking and Daniel protecting himself from disappointment. He was thinking. What does permanent mean? He asked. It means I adopt you, I said. Legally, you'd have my name. This would be your home, not temporarily. He looked at his cereal bowl, then out the window, then back at me. What about my dad? He said. Your father would have to agree to give up his legal rights as a parent, I said. Or a court would have to make that decision. Would he agree? I thought about Marcus on the prepaid phone, telling me Daniel was fine where he was. I thought about the parking lot outside the burning warehouse and the first question he had asked. I thought about $80,000 and a healthy woman he had told me was dying. I think he will, I said. Daniel nodded slowly. He looked at his bowl again. Then he said, "'Kay." And then, after a pause that lasted long enough that I thought he had moved on to something else entirely, he said, "Thank you." It was the first time he had said those 2 words to me directly. Not for a meal or a ride or something borrowed. For this, I found I didn't have an immediate response, which was unusual for me. I refilled my coffee and changed the subject, which was the best I could manage. Maggie sent the termination papers to Marcus through a process server in March of 2009. He was in Georgia by then, at an address Hank would later confirm through other means. Marcus signed the papers, had them notarized, and returned them within 2 weeks. No negotiation, no conditions, no counter-proposal, just a signature on a line that legally severed him from his son, executed with the same casual efficiency he applied to everything that didn't benefit him directly. I had expected to feel something when I saw the signed documents. Relief, perhaps, or satisfaction, or even anger at how easily he had done it. What I actually felt was a cold and clarifying recognition. Marcus had not abandoned Daniel by accident or desperation or circumstance. He had done it because Daniel had never been, in any real sense, something Marcus wanted to keep. Victor called when I told him the adoption was proceeding. The call lasted 4 minutes. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You've said that," I said. "I'm saying it again. You're 62 years old. A child changes everything. The estate plan, the succession structure, the partnership. The partnership is not your concern," I said. A pause. "Everything that affects the company is my concern," he said. "Then concern yourself with the quarterly numbers," I said. "I'll handle the rest." He hung up before I did. Victor always preferred to be the last one to speak. I noted the departure from pattern and said nothing. What I did not tell Victor, what I did not tell anyone at the time, was that the moment Daniel had hesitated before answering my question about dinner, I had recognized something in him that I had no right to recognize that quickly. I had seen the arithmetic of a child who had been told by other people's choices that he did not count, that he was the category of person things happened to, not the category of person things were done for. I had stood in that arithmetic myself. I knew what it felt like from the inside. And I knew, standing in my own kitchen, looking at an 11-year-old boy with a canvas backpack and his father's absence behind him, that I was not going to be the next person who left. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 2009. Cook County Courthouse, 3rd floor, a courtroom that smelled like old paper and central heating. Daniel wore a collared shirt he had ironed himself, which I knew because I had watched him do it that morning with the focused attention he applied to things he wanted to get right. The judge was efficient and not unkind. The paperwork took 38 minutes. Afterward, standing on the courthouse steps in the October sun, Daniel looked at the copy of the order Maggie had handed him and read it twice. Then he said his name quietly, not to me, just to himself. Daniel Cole. Testing the weight of it, seeing how it sat. "That's you," I said. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. We went to dinner at a place on the north side he had mentioned once in passing 3 months earlier, which he did not realize I had remembered. He ordered what he always ordered. We talked about football and a supply contract I was working on, and nothing of particular consequence, which was exactly right. I had been chosen once, at 4 months old, by 2 people who owed me nothing. I understood, sitting across from Daniel at that table, that I had just done the same thing. What I did not understand yet was that Marcus had watched all of it, calculated all of it, and decided somewhere in the space between signing those papers and disappearing to Georgia that what he had given up was not a son. It was a claim, one he intended to make again, on his own terms, when the moment was right. The moment would not arrive for another 15 years. In the meantime, Daniel grew up. He was not an easy child in the way that children who have learned to expect disappointment are never entirely easy. He was watchful and careful and slow to trust, and he expressed almost nothing of what he was feeling until he had processed it thoroughly enough to present it cleanly. These were not qualities that made adolescence simple. They were qualities that made him, over time, someone I trusted completely. By the time he was 16, he was coming into the warehouse on weekends and learning the operation from the floor up, not because I asked him to, but because he was curious, and because he understood, without being told, that understanding how something works is more valuable than being told what it does. At 18, he could read a supply contract faster than most of my account managers. At 22, finishing a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois, he called me from his apartment the night before graduation and asked if there was a position at Cole Industrial for someone who knew the company from the inside out. I told him there was. I told him it would not be a comfortable position because I had no interest in giving him anything he had not earned, and that the people who had been there for 20 years would be watching him to see if he was worth their respect. He said he understood. He showed up the following Monday in a collared shirt he had ironed himself, which by that point I expected nothing less of. And he went to work. By the time he was 28, Daniel Cole was running the engineering and operations side of Cole Industrial Supply with the focused competence that had stopped surprising me years ago and simply become the baseline. He made good decisions, and he made them quietly, without need to be seen making them. The people who had been there for 20 years gave him their respect, not because I had asked them to, but because he had earned it the way you earn things that matter slowly, without shortcuts. One reliable day at a time. He was the best thing I had ever built, and I had not built him. I had only provided the conditions. He had built himself, sitting in the observation room watching him at the head of that conference table. I thought about the boy who had left his shoes by the mat without being asked, who had said yes, sir, to a bowl of cereal in a stranger's kitchen, who had said his own name on a courthouse steps like he was trying it on to see if it fit. It fit. It had always fit. He had simply needed the room to grow into it. Marcus had left a boy on a doorstep because the boy was inconvenient. What Marcus had not understood, what he had spectacularly failed to calculate in all his years of careful scheming, was that the inconvenient boy had become the most capable person in the room, and that the man Marcus was counting on to be weakened by illness and age and sentiment was sitting 12 feet away behind a wall, watching everything, and had been ready for this morning for a very long time. Marcus had made the same mistake about Daniel that he had made about me. He had looked at both of us and seen what we were given, not what we had built. That was always his fundamental error. Marcus understood inheritance. He had never understood work. There is something I have not told yet, and it belongs here, before the rest of it makes complete sense. The fire started on a Wednesday night in November of 2003. I know the exact date because I had been reviewing a supply contract at my desk in the warehouse office on Sir Mac Road, and the date was printed at the top of the page in the way that dates on contracts always are precise, indifferent, permanent. I remember the smell before I saw anything. Not smoke, exactly. Something sharper underneath it. Chemical and deliberate. The kind of smell that does not belong in a building full of steel and dry goods, and does not arrive by accident. I had been in enough construction environments over enough years to know the difference between a fire that starts from negligence and a fire that starts from intention. This one announced itself. I got up from my desk. The hallway outside the office was already thick with it, gray-brown smoke moving fast, the kind that does not give you time to think about what you should have done differently. I made it to the main floor and lost my orientation in approximately 30 seconds. The layout I had walked 1,000 times became unfamiliar in the dark and the heat, which is something they do not tell you about fires. The building you know becomes a building you do not know. I went down. Not dramatically. I caught a shelving unit with my shoulder on the way to the floor exit and went down hard on the concrete. And by the time I understood what had happened, the smoke was sitting low and heavy around me, and I could not see more than a few feet in any direction. Then I heard a voice, Mr. Ray. Small. Frightened. Coming from somewhere to my left. Mr. Ray. Get up. Daniel was 7 years old. Marcus had brought him to the warehouse that afternoon, one of 3 or 4 times over the previous year that Marcus had used the warehouse office as an informal meeting point when he had business nearby and nowhere to leave the boy. Daniel had been in the break room with a book when I last checked on him 2 hours before the fire started. I did not know he was still in the building. I had assumed Marcus had taken him when he left. He had not. Daniel found me on the floor. I do not know how. The smoke was thick enough that visibility was measured in feet, but he found me, grabbed my arm with both hands, and pulled with the determined and slightly panicked effort of a child who has decided that failing is not an option. "Come on," he said. "Come on, Mr. Ray." His voice was steady in the way children's voices sometimes are in emergencies focused past the fear into the thing that needs doing. I got up. I do not know with certainty whether I could have gotten up without him. I have thought about that question for 20 years, and I still do not have a clean answer. What I know is that I did get up, and Daniel kept his hand on my arm all the way to the side exit. And we came out into the November night together, coughing and alive. Marcus arrived 11 minutes after the fire department. I know the timing because I was watching the clock on my phone while Daniel and I sat on the tailgate of my truck, wrapped in blankets a firefighter had produced. Half the roof was gone by then. The west wall was collapsing inward. 20 years of work burning against the night sky in a way that was almost beautiful if you did not know what it was. Marcus crossed the parking lot with his phone in his hand. He looked at the building. He looked at Daniel wrapped in the blanket. He looked at me. And then, before he asked if either of us was hurt, before he asked what had happened, before he said a single word to his 7-year-old son who had just walked out of a burning building, he said this: "Did you call the insurance company yet?" I looked at him for a long moment. Daniel was looking at his father too, not with anger. Not with the vocabulary for anger yet, but with the particular attention of a child filing something away carefully to think about later. I watched him do it. I did not say anything. "Not yet," I said. "You need to call tonight," Marcus said. "The longer you wait, the more complicated it gets." The fire marshal's report listed the cause as undetermined. That word had bothered me in the low, persistent way that things bother you when you sense they matter, but cannot find the thread. The insurance payout was processed without complication. The secondary beneficiary listed on the warehouse policy was Victor Huang. I had noted that detail at the time. I had not acted on it. In March of 2023, 19 years later, I finally found the thread. It had been there the whole time. I had simply needed to know where to look, and to have a reason pressing enough to make me look. The diagnosis gave me both. Doctor. Patricia Walsh had the particular quality of a doctor who delivered difficult news without apology. She was not cruel about it. She simply understood, in the way that good doctors eventually do, that softening a diagnosis does not change it. It only delays the conversation the patient needs to have with themselves. She sat across from me in her office on a Tuesday morning in January of 2023, set a folder of test results on the desk between us, and told me what my body had been doing for the past 14 months without my knowledge or permission. The technical terms were precise and not particularly relevant to this account. What mattered was the summary. Prostate cancer. Stage 2. Contained, but progressing. Surgical intervention was the recommended path, a procedure with strong outcomes at my age, she said, provided the patient was otherwise healthy, which I was. Recovery would run 8 to 12 weeks of restricted activity. Without surgery, she estimated 18 months of functional health before the deterioration became something else. I looked at the folder on her desk. I thought about the warehouse on Kermack Road and Victor Huang's name on an insurance policy and a prepaid phone in Georgia, and a 7-year-old boy who had pulled me off a concrete floor 20 years ago and was now 28, and running the operations side of a company that certain people had decided they were entitled to take. "I'm not going to have the surgery right now," I said. "Doctor." Walsh looked at me the way doctors look at patients who have made a decision they disagree with, but recognize as the patient's to make. "May I ask why?" "There are things I need to finish," I said. "The recovery window creates a problem." She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully, "the recovery window is 8 to 12 weeks. The alternative is 18 months of manageable decline, followed by significantly accelerated deterioration. I understand the alternative," I said. "I need the 18 months. The surgery gives me 3 months of restricted activity followed by years of not having finished what I started. The math doesn't work for me right now." She prescribed 3 medications, scheduled monthly monitoring appointments, and told me to reduce red meat and manage stress. The last of which she said with the faint expression of a doctor who understood it was the least actionable item on the list. I thanked her, shook her hand, and drove home. I told Daniel and Ava that evening. They came for dinner on Tuesday nights, a habit Daniel had built into his week without being asked and never commented on. Ava made coffee after the meal. Daniel was talking about a logistics issue he was managing at the company. I waited for a natural pause in the conversation. "I have something to tell you both," I said. The pause extended. I told them what Dr. Walsh had told me. I told them about the timeline, the medication, the decision about surgery. I told them clearly and without softening it, the way I had been told. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Ava set her coffee mug down carefully. "The way you set something down when you need your hands free to think." "The surgery," Daniel said finally. "She said it would give you more time." "She did." "Then why?" "Because 3 months of recovery is 3 months." "I don't have right now," I said. "There are things I need to handle. Things I should have handled years ago and didn't, for what he asked." His voice was controlled. I could see what it was costing him to protect what we've built. I said, "Both of us. Everything you're going to inherit. Everything I've spent 30 years constructing there are people who intend to take it. I have known this for a while. I have not moved fast enough. The diagnosis changes the timeline. Ava was watching me with the particular focus of someone assembling information faster than the conversation was providing it. "How long have you known?" she said. "Not about the diagnosis. About the other thing." "Long enough," I said. "Too long." Daniel sat back. He looked at the table. Then he looked at me. The quality of his silence in that moment. Not anger, not despair, but the focused stillness of a man recalibrating was one of the things I had always admired most about him. He did not perform his feelings. He processed them. "What do you need from us?" he said. "Right now." "Nothing," I said. "I need to make some calls and set some things in motion. Eventually, I'll need you to trust a process without knowing all of it. And I'll need Ava's help with some financial arrangements." Ava nodded once. "Tell me when." "Soon," I said. We finished the evening, the way we finished most evenings, talking about things of no particular consequence. The rhythm of ordinary life, continuing in the space around the extraordinary thing we had just discussed. That was how Daniel and Ava handled difficulty. They did not let it consume the room. I had always found that quality in them to be one of the better arguments for the kind of family you choose rather than the kind you are assigned. After they left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Maggie Chen. It was 9:47 in the evening. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting a call of some kind, or something like it. Maggie had a gift for anticipating the shape of things before they fully arrived. "I need to see you," I said. "Thursday, if you have it." "I have Thursday morning," she said. 8 o'clock. "And Maggie," I said, "clear the rest of the morning. I'm going to tell you about a trap I've been building in my head for 6 years. Now I need to build it in reality." A brief pause. Then she said she would make coffee. I hung up and looked at the kitchen wall for a while longer. 18 months, give or take. It was enough. It was going to have to be. I have always believed that the best kind of trap is one that looks like an opportunity. Not a cage, not a wall. An open door, well lit, clearly marked, positioned exactly where the person walking toward it expects an open door to be. The genius of a good trap is not the mechanism. It is the architecture of expectation. You build the world your target believes they are walking through, and then you build the floor beneath it. I had been designing this particular trap for 6 years. What the diagnosis gave me was a deadline. Maggie Chen listened to the full outline on a Thursday morning in March without taking notes, which was how she listened when something required her complete attention rather than documentation. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would need to restructure 3 existing files and create 2 new ones, and that she wanted everything moving through her office on paper rather than digitally for the duration. I told her that was exactly what I had in mind. I called Hank Morrison the following week. He came to my office on a Wednesday morning, a compact man in his early 50s, with the particular stillness that comes from spending 22 years as a Chicago police detective, watching people who did not know they were being watched. He had left the department in 2015 and built a private practice that operated, from what I had gathered, with the same methodical precision as his time on the force. He was not talkative. He was not cheap. He was exactly what I needed. I need surveillance on 2 people, I said. Consistent, documented, legally airtight. He took out a small notebook. The names. Marcus Cole, I said. My brother. And Victor Huang, my business partner of 28 years. Hank did not react to either name. He wrote them down. What am I looking for? Communication between them, I said. Meetings, shared contacts, financial transactions if you can access them legally. I want to know if they are coordinating and what the coordination looks like. He asked why I suspected they were. I told him about the fire in 2003. I told him about Victor's name on the insurance policy and the fire marshal's report that had listed the cause as undetermined. I told him about Marcus's pattern of requests and disappearances and the particular timing of everything relative to Daniel's situation. I told him that for 6 years I had been carrying pattern recognition without confirmation, and that I needed confirmation. Hank listened without interrupting. He had the quality of a good listener, not passive, but active. The kind of listening that is really a form of building. That's a long time to sit on something, he said when I finished. I didn't have confirmation, I said. I had pattern recognition. I need confirmation. He put the notebook away and stood. I'll be in touch in 30 days. He was in touch in 21. By April, Hank had documented 9 meetings between Marcus and Victor, 2 restaurants in Naperville, a parking garage on Michigan Avenue, twice at a golf club in Wheaton that neither of them had any obvious reason to be members of. The pattern was clear. They were not running into each other. They were organizing. I read the April report at my desk at 5 in the morning before Patricia arrived. I read Victor's name in Hank's careful handwriting and sat with it for a while. 28 years. We had driven across Cook County together in a company truck in 1994, laughing about a client who had tried to negotiate a contract at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. We had stood in the rain at the groundbreaking for our 3rd warehouse and shaken hands and meant it. We had built something real together, and the reality of what we had built did not disappear because of what he was doing now. It just meant that what he was doing now was going to cost him everything he had built, too. I folded the report, put it in an envelope, and locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I was not angry in the ordinary sense. I was simply clearer than I had been the day before about what needed to be done. By May, Hank had identified a 3rd name in the communications network, a woman named Patricia Solis, 34 years old, 7 years of executive support experience across 3 companies, 2 of which I recognized. The 3rd I did not. I called Hank that evening. That's Patricia Solis, he said, currently putting together an application for an executive assistant position at a company I've been watching. I need a background check within 48 hours. She worked for Huang, he said. Not directly through a consulting arrangement that ran for 16 months and ended 8 months ago. The arrangement was structured through a shell entity Huang uses for off-book personnel expenses. The payments are documented if you know where to look. Does she know I would know where to look? I asked. I doubt it, Hank said. She's good. But she's operating on the assumption that her connection to Huang is adequately buried. It isn't. I scheduled Patricia Solis's interview for the following Tuesday. I had been building a trap for 6 years, and I had just found the door I needed to leave open. I met with Ava alone on a Thursday afternoon in May. Not at the office, at a coffee shop on the north side, a place that had no connection to anything either of us did professionally. I arrived first. I always arrive first. It was a habit my father had built into me without meaning to. His belief that arriving early told the other person their time mattered to you before they had said a word. I had kept the habit long after I had forgotten where I learned it. Ava Kim came in at 2:58. She sat down, ordered nothing, and looked at me directly. She had the quality of capable people who see no reason to perform their capabilities until performance is required. Daniel knew she was sharp. He did not yet know quite how sharp. "I need you to set up a holding company in Delaware," I said. "Clean registration. No connection to coal industrial supply or to me personally. Operational within 60 days. She did not write anything down. A pause. "Purpose. Debt acquisition," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Whose debt?" "Marcus Cole's," I said. I heard her think. That was something I had always found remarkable about Ava. You could hear her thinking not because she was loud, but because the quality of her silence changed when she was processing something significant. "How much?" she said. "Approximately $1.8 million across 5 creditors," I said. "The largest single holder is a man named Carl Dempsey in Milwaukee. I want the purchases made at a discount 65 to 70 cents on the dollar and completed before September. Does Daniel know about this?" "Not yet," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "If Marcus finds out his debt has been purchased by an entity connected to you, that is why it cannot be connected to me," I said. "Not yet. Marcus needs to keep believing his creditors are arm's-length commercial relationships. The moment he understands what has happened, the leverage disappears." She considered that for a moment. "You are not just building a legal case," she said. "You are building a situation where Marcus has no options left by the time he realizes he has no options." "Yes," I said. "That is exactly it." She paused. "That is very thorough." "Thank you," I said. The Delaware Holding Company was registered in June under a name that contained no reference to coal, Chicago, or industrial supply. Ava handled the paperwork with the efficient invisibility of someone who understood exactly why each step needed to be taken exactly as it was being taken. By July, she had purchased Marcus's debt from 4 of the 5 creditors at an average of 67 cents on the dollar. They were practical about it. Each of them had been carrying Marcus's obligations long enough to develop accurate instincts about the likelihood of full recovery. When a clean offer arrived through proper channels, they took it without significant negotiation. Carl Dempsey was the last and the largest. He had been holding the biggest single piece of Marcus's debt for 3 years and had concluded, with the pragmatism of a man who had spent 30 years lending money to unreliable people, that full recovery was unlikely. But Dempsey was also using the debt as leverage in a separate arrangement with Marcus, a piece of information Hank had included in his June report without editorial comment. Which was how Hank included all information. I drove to Milwaukee on a Tuesday morning and met Dempsey at his office on the west side of the city. He was a compact man in his early 60s, with the careful eyes of someone who had been negotiating across tables long enough to read a room before the conversation started. He read me. I let him. I placed a number on the table. Not an opening number. The right number. The number that reflected what the debt was actually worth to a man in his specific position, given the full context of his arrangement with Marcus. I did not explain how I knew the full context. I simply placed the number on the table and waited. Dempsey looked at it for a long moment. Then he asked when I needed an answer. 48 hours would be sufficient. I told him. He called back in 36. We completed the transfer the following week. By the end of August, every dollar Marcus Cole owed to anyone in the world belonged to a Delaware holding company with no visible connection to my name, my company, or anyone Marcus would think to investigate. The total acquisition cost had come in at 68 cents on the dollar against a face value of $1.8 million. Marcus did not know. He was still meeting Victor at a restaurant in Naperville, still building his strategy, still operating under the assumption that his financial situation remained his own business to manage. It was not. It had not been since July. He was standing on a floor I had poured, in a room I had designed, debating the layout with a man who already held the deed. What Marcus understood about leverage was considerable. What he had never understood was that leverage only functions when the other person does not know you have it. I knew. And the next piece of the trap required a different kind of patience entirely. It required someone on the inside. Patricia Solis arrived for her interview 4 minutes early, which told me she was disciplined, but not performatively so. She was 34 years old, composed, with the particular alertness of someone paying attention to more than the immediate conversation. She sat across from my desk, set her bag on the floor rather than her lap, the gesture of someone comfortable in professional environments, and answered my questions with the clean economy of a person who had prepared thoroughly and was not going to oversell it. She was good. I want to be clear about that. Whatever Victor had been paying her to do, Patricia Solis was genuinely qualified for the position she was applying for. The two things were not mutually exclusive, and conflating them would have been imprecise. Toward the end of the interview, I asked her why she had left her previous position. The work stopped being interesting, she said. What made it interesting before it stopped? She considered the question for a moment. Not performing consideration. Actually doing it. Access, she said. Being close enough to the decision-making that you understand the shape of what is happening. Not just executing tasks. And you think this position offers that. I think you are someone who makes decisions worth being close to, she said. Whether you give me access to them is your choice. I am telling you what I find interesting. It was a good answer. Honest in the ways that served her, and careful about the ways that did not. I hired her on Thursday, and asked her to start the following Monday. Then I called Hank from my car in the parking garage. I am hiring her, I said. A pause. You are hiring Victor's asset. I am hiring Victor's asset, I confirmed. And I need you to set up a consent monitoring arrangement before she starts. I want documentation of everything she accesses, copies, or transmits. All of it legally obtained. All of it time-stamped. She will need to sign a consent form as part of onboarding, Hank said. Standard IT monitoring disclosure. Most people do not read them carefully. Make sure ours is thorough, I said. I want the consent to be real, and I want the documentation to be airtight. Understood. And the information she sends to Victor, let it go, I said. For now. I want Victor to believe he has a functioning channel into my operation, a channel I control. Hank was quiet for a moment. You are going to feed him information. Selectively, I said. Yes. I spent the following 2 weeks watching Patricia work. She was efficient, organized, and subtle in the way of someone who had been trained to gather information without appearing to gather it. She went through the motions of a new employee, learning a new environment, while doing something slightly more than that. And she did it well enough that anyone not specifically looking for it would not have seen it. I was specifically looking for it. I placed the first piece of bait in her 3rd week. A copy of what appeared to be my current, will not the real document, which Maggie held in a sealed file, but a plausible version that listed the estate distribution in terms Victor would find encouraging. I left it in a folder on my desk during a meeting I stepped out of. Patricia had 11 minutes alone in the office. When I returned, the folder was precisely where I had left it. The next morning, Hank sent me a confirmation. The document had been photographed and transmitted to an email address associated with Victor Huang's personal account. The second piece of bait was an internal memo about a meeting with a financial advisor, containing figures that suggested the company's liquid assets were significantly lower than they actually were. I left it in the printer tray on a Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday evening it had been transmitted. The third was a USB drive. I left it on my desk on a Thursday morning, labeled with a strip of tape that read, Estate Draft. I went to a meeting that ran 2 hours. When I returned, the drive was in exactly the same position. Same angle. Tape undisturbed. I called Hank. The drive, I said. Did she copy it? She plugged it in at 10:47. Hank said. Spent 4 minutes with it. Copied the contents to a personal device and returned it. Good, I said. What was on it? A document describing in convincing detail an estate plan that leaves Marcus and Victor well provided for. I said, generous distributions. No unusual clauses. Nothing to trigger concern. Hank was quiet for a moment. So Victor thinks he knows what the will says. Victor thinks he knows exactly what the will says. I confirmed. He has been reading my correspondence for 8 weeks, and every piece of it has told him the same story. He is going to walk into that conference room in 13 months, believing he has a complete picture, and the picture is wrong. The picture, I said, is a set I built for him. Every prop is in place. Every sight line is controlled. The only thing Victor does not know is that the theater belongs to me. Patricia was still at her desk in the outer office, working through the afternoon correspondence with the focused efficiency she applied to everything. She was, in the technical sense, still Victor's asset reporting, transmitting, feeding information back through the channel Victor believed he controlled. What she was actually doing, without knowing it, was building Victor's confidence in a fiction I had written specifically for him. Every document she sent was a brick. Every brick made the walls higher. And Victor, standing inside those walls and looking at the sky I had painted for him, was becoming more certain by the week that he understood exactly what was coming. He did not understand anything, but there was still one piece I had not accounted for. One name that would arrive in Hank's October report that I had not anticipated. And that name would require a conversation more delicate than anything I had managed yet. Hank sent his October report on a Monday morning, which was unusual. We had established a Thursday rhythm in the first month of our arrangement and maintained it without discussion. The way two people who work well together build patterns without needing to name them. A Monday delivery meant something had moved faster than expected. I read it at my desk before Patricia arrived. The report was 38 pages. I read all of it. The core of it was this: Marcus and Victor had moved from coordination to consolidation. The 9 meetings Hank had documented through September had produced, by October, something that looked less like 2 men discussing a shared interest and more like 2 men executing a shared plan. The corner booth at the restaurant in Naperville had become their primary meeting point. Cash payments, positioned away from the room's sight lines, in the particular way of people who understood they were doing something they would prefer not to explain. Hank had obtained a partial transcript from a consensual source he declined to name, covering approximately 35 minutes of a meeting on the 9th of October. I read the transcript 3 times. The strategy they had settled on had 3 components. The first was a mental competency challenge. Victor would provide testimony, supported by 2 doctors he had identified through a contact at a private psychiatric practice in the city, that my recent behavior had shown signs of cognitive decline, erratic decision-making, unusual financial transactions, undue susceptibility to influence. The goal was not to win the challenge outright, but to create enough procedural uncertainty to delay the estate proceedings and force a settlement. The second component was Daniel. Specifically, undue influence, the argument that Daniel, as the primary beneficiary and the person with the most consistent access to me in my final years, had manipulated my decision-making in ways that compromised the integrity of the will. A standard argument in contested estate cases, Hank noted in his summary. Difficult to disprove without clear documentation of independent intent. The third component was the one that stopped me: a child. Marcus had found a woman, a Diane Walsh, 32 years old. Chicago address. Single mother of a 10-year-old boy named Noah. According to the partial transcript and subsequent surveillance, Marcus's plan was to present Noah as my biological child, a previously unknown heir whose existence would complicate the estate distribution and create grounds for a substantial settlement. I set the report down. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Hank. "The child," I said. "Noah Walsh. Who is his father?" "Working on it," Hank said. "The birth certificate lists unknown. But that is a legal designation, not necessarily an accurate one. I have requested the hospital records through a legal channel. 2 to 3 weeks. "What is your read?" I said. A pause. Hank did not offer reads without being asked. When he was asked, he was precise. The woman, Diane Walsh, has had documented contact with Marcus Cole going back to 2012, he said, 11 years before I started watching him. The contact appears to have been personal rather than professional. There is a gap in documented communication between 2014 and 2022, which could mean a clean break, or it could mean they moved to channels I have not accessed yet. You think Marcus is the father? I said. I think the timeline is consistent with it, Hank said. And I think if Marcus is asking this woman to present her son as your biological child, he has a specific reason to believe the request will not be refused. Leverage or dependency, I said. Sometimes they look the same, Hank said. I hung up and looked out the window for a while. What Marcus had constructed the competency challenge, the undue influence argument, the fabricated heir, wasn't unintelligent. Each component addressed a different vulnerability in a standard estate proceeding. Together, they created a multi-front legal problem that would be expensive and time-consuming to defend against. The point was not necessarily to win. The point was to exhaust, to create enough noise and delay that a settlement became the path of least resistance. It would have worked against most people. It was not going to work against me, but not for the reasons Marcus thought. Hank sent a follow-up report 3 weeks later. The hospital records had been obtained. The attending physician's notes from the birth included a paternity acknowledgement form that had been filled out, signed, and then, according to the hospital's administrative record, subsequently withdrawn and replaced with the unknown designation. The original form had been signed by Marcus Cole. He had withdrawn the acknowledgement 6 weeks after Noah was born. I called Hank immediately. He is the father. I said. He is the father, Hank confirmed. And he has been legally unacknowledged for 10 years while the child has been living 40 minutes from his house. I thought about Noah. 10 years old. Growing up with a blank space on a form where a name should have been, because his father had decided that the acknowledgement was inconvenient. I thought about an 11-year-old boy with a canvas backpack standing on a sidewalk in the August dark. She is not a bad person, Hank said. Diane Walsh. She is a person in a difficult position that Marcus has been cultivating for a specific purpose. I know, I said. That is why I am going to talk to her before Marcus gets to use her. A pause. That is a delicate conversation. Yes, I said. But I have been having delicate conversations for 60 years. I think I can manage one more. The coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue was the kind of place that didn't try too hard. Mismatched chairs, exposed brick, a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in 3 years. I arrived 9 minutes early and took a corner table facing the door. I ordered black coffee and set my phone face down. Hank had given me her schedule. Diane Walsh worked Tuesday through Saturday at a design studio 2 blocks north. She took her lunch break at 12:15, always alone. Always at one of 3 places within walking distance. I had chosen this one because it had a rear exit and low foot traffic on weekdays. She walked in at 12:18. She was younger than I expected, even knowing she was 32. She moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned not to take up too much space. Brown coat, dark jeans, a canvas bag over one shoulder. She scanned the room twice before she saw me raise my hand. She sat down without taking off her coat. Mr. Cole. Not a question. Thank you for coming. You said it was about Noah. Her voice was even. Whatever fear she carried, she kept it below the surface. I respected that immediately. It is, I said. And I want to be direct with you so you don't have to wonder what this meeting is. She waited. I placed a manila folder on the table between us. Not in front of her. Between us. Equidistant, so she could see I wasn't demanding anything. Inside were 3 documents, a copy of the original paternity acknowledgement Marcus had signed when Noah was born, the withdrawal notice filed 6 weeks later, and a notarized statement from the hospital records office confirming the chain of custody on both documents. She looked at the folder, but didn't open it. You already know what's in there, I said. A pause. Then, why does it matter to you? It was the right question. The only question that mattered. Because Marcus is planning to bring Noah into a legal proceeding and claim the boy is mine. I said. He's going to tell a judge that Noah is my biological son, use that claim to challenge my estate, and create enough disruption to force a settlement. None of it is true. And when it falls apart, which it will, Noah is the one left holding the paperwork. The color shifted slightly in her face. Not surprise. Recognition. He told me it was to protect Noah, she said quietly. He said there was a trust involved. There is a trust involved, I said. Mine. And Marcus intends to use your son to break it open. She looked at the folder now. Opened it. Read the first page slowly. The second, quickly. The third she held for a long moment before setting it down. He signed this, she said. About the paternity acknowledgement. He did. And then he withdrew it. Which means legally, Noah has no established father of record, which means Marcus can reintroduce himself in any form that suits him, including as a concerned party with standing in my estate. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward me slightly, not returning it. Thinking. What do you want from me? She asked. Nothing you're not willing to give. I said. I want you to understand what's happening. And I want you to know that I've already set up a protected educational trust for Noah, separate from my estate. Separate from anything Marcus can touch. It's funded. It's clean. And it transfers to Noah unconditionally when he turns 18, regardless of what happens in any courtroom. She looked at me for a long moment. Why would you do that? Because he's a child who didn't choose any of this, I said. And I've watched what happens to children when the adults around them treat them like instruments. The silence between us was a different kind now. Not guarded. Something closer to recognition. What would I need to do? She asked. Tell the truth, I said. If you're called to testify, and I believe you will tell the truth about Noah's paternity, about what Marcus asked you to do, and about when he asked you to do it. That's all. And if I don't, then Marcus proceeds with his plan, and Noah's name ends up in a probate filing as a disputed heir. That record doesn't disappear. It follows him. She looked down at the folder again. Her jaw tightened once. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She stood, adjusted her bag, and left without ordering anything. I watched her walk past the window on Milwaukee Avenue. Coat pulled close against the October wind. I sat with my coffee for another 10 minutes. I didn't know yet whether she would testify, but I knew she would think about it. The way a person thinks about something they already know the answer to slowly, carefully, working their way toward the decision they had already made the moment they walked through the door. The trust paperwork for Noah was already filed. It was real, regardless of what she chose. Some things you do because they're useful. Some things you do because they're right. The best plans are the ones where those two reasons are the same thing. I left a 20 on the table and walked back to my car. There were 3 months left before everything would have to be in place. By February 2024, I had been living with the diagnosis for 13 months. The medications kept the progression manageable. Some mornings were better than others. I had learned which hours of the day belonged to me, and which ones I had to negotiate with my own body. I scheduled everything important before noon. The video deposition was Maggie's idea. She had raised it twice in 2023, and I had deferred both times. By January 2024, I called her and told her to schedule it. 2 psychiatrists, she said. Board certified. No connection to you, the firm, or anyone in the family. Clean chain of custody on the recording. Set it up. Dr. Okafor and Dr. Marsh arrived on a Tuesday morning in February. They were precise, unhurried professionals who treated the proceeding with the same quiet seriousness I had come to expect from people who were genuinely good at their work. The session ran 2 hours and 40 minutes across 3 recorded segments. They asked me about current events, asked me to describe the company's structure, asked me to walk through the timeline of the adoption. They asked about my relationship with Marcus. I answered everything directly and without embellishment. At the end, Dr. Okafor signed first. Dr. Marsh countersigned. Maggie's paralegal notarized both signatures on camera. The recording established one thing above all else, that on the date of its making, Raymond Cole was of sound mind, clear memory, and full legal capacity. If anyone wanted to argue mental incompetence, they would be arguing against 2 independent board-certified psychiatrists and a 2-hour 40-minute recording that showed every answer I gave and every question I was asked. Marcus's first legal layer had just been neutralized before he filed a single document. 3 weeks later, I called Maggie to a second meeting. This one was shorter. I told her something I had never told anyone connected to my legal affairs. I told her I was adopted. Harold and Evelyn Cole had taken me in when I was 7 years old. The adoption was finalized in 1968 in Cook County. My biological parents were never identified. Harold and Evelyn raised me, gave me their name, and never once made me feel the difference between chosen and born. Harold died in 1991, 3 weeks after I signed the lease on the first Kermack Road warehouse. Evelyn passed in 2004, the same year as the fire. I had never hidden this. I had simply never needed to raise it. Maggie was quiet for a moment after I finished. Does this affect the will? I asked. It affects Marcus's bloodline argument, she said. If he tries to claim inheritance rights through biological lineage, we can challenge his standing entirely. You have no biological obligation to him under Illinois law. The adoption severs that line. I want it documented, I said. Original Cook County adoption order. Certified copy. Filed with the estate package. I'll pull the records this week. She did. The certified copy arrived by the following Thursday. It went into the estate file alongside the psychiatric evaluation, the medical records from Dr. Walsh confirming the cancer diagnosis and treatment timeline, and a notarized vasectomy record from 1987, a document that made any claim of Ray Cole fathering a child after that date medically impossible. Marcus's third legal layer. The fabricated heir had just been dismantled before it was ever assembled. The will itself was 47 pages. Maggie and I had worked through it over 6 sessions spanning 4 months. It was specific, annotated, and deliberate. Every asset was listed by name, location, and assessed value. Every transfer was tied to a condition and a timeline. The interim clause, the no contest provision, was written in language that left no interpretive room. Any beneficiary who initiated a legal challenge to the will's validity would forfeit their bequest entirely. Marcus was listed as a beneficiary. He was to receive $1. He could contest the will and lose everything, or accept $1 and receive nothing worth having. Either way, the clause was a door that locked from the inside. The final item I asked Maggie to add was a sealed envelope, to be placed on the conference table at the will reading and handed to Daniel after all other business was concluded. Maggie asked what was in it. I told her it was a letter. For Daniel, she asked, yes, about the adoption. Among other things, she wrote it into the instructions without asking further. That was one of the things I valued most about Maggie Chen across 22 years. She knew the difference between information she needed and information that belonged to someone else. I left her office that afternoon and drove home along Lake Shore Drive with the windows down despite the cold. The lake was flat and gray and enormous. Everything that needed to be built had been built. What remained now was patience, and the one piece I still had, not told Daniel. I built it myself. That is not a metaphor. I mean, I went to the workshop behind the garage on a Saturday morning in April, found the cedar planks I had been storing since 2019, and spent 4 hours cutting, joining, and finishing a box approximately 14 inches long, 9 inches wide, and 6 inches deep. I used a hand plane on the lid until the grain ran smooth under my fingers. I drilled the hinge holes by hand because I wanted to feel every millimeter of it. I had built things with my hands my whole life before I built things with contracts and capital. It felt correct that this particular object should be made the old way. I lined the interior with dark felt. The lid closed with a quiet, solid sound. On a Tuesday evening in June 2024, Ava left early for a dinner with a client. Daniel and I sat on the back porch as the light dropped. It was the kind of Chicago evening that almost argues the city is worth the winter's warm without being heavy. The kind of air that carries the smell of cut grass from 3 houses down. I brought the cedar box out and set it on the table between us. Daniel looked at it the way he looked at most things, steadily, without rushing. "I want to walk you through what's in here," I said. He nodded. I opened the lid. The USB drive was on top, wrapped in a small cloth sleeve. I told him it contained 5 folders. The first held Hank Morrison's complete surveillance reports, every meeting, every timestamp, every photograph of Marcus and Victor together across 14 months. The second held the Delaware LLC documentation and the full debt acquisition record, every creditor, every purchase price, every transfer date. The third held Patricia's IT monitoring logs, every document she had copied, every transmission she had sent to Victor, time-stamped and legally certified. The fourth held the financial analysis Ava had prepared, showing exactly what Victor's shell consulting arrangement had extracted from the company over 4 years, and how it had been structured to look like legitimate fees. The fifth folder was labeled Fire, November 2003. Daniel looked up when I said that. "I'll come back to that one," I said. I set the USB aside and lifted a rubber-banded set of documents from the left side of the box. These were the original architectural drawings for all 3 warehouses Cermak Road, the Pilsen expansion, and the Bridgeport facility. Beside them were the property assessments from 1991, 1994, and 1998 that had established each building's recorded value at acquisition. And beside those were 3 current independent appraisals I had commissioned in January 2024. The recorded values, I said, were set conservatively at the time, on purpose. Daniel studied the numbers. The Cermak Road property had been recorded at $310,000 in 1991. Its current independent appraisal came in at $1.24 million. The Pilsen building recorded at $275,000, appraised at $980,000. Bridgeport recorded at $420,000 in 1998, appraised at $1.87 million. The estate value Marcus's lawyer will argue against, I said, is based on recorded values. The actual value is closer to 4 times that number. They will be preparing a legal strategy for an estate worth approximately $8 million. The actual transferable estate is closer to $31 million. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "You kept this off the books," he said. "Not an accusation, a recognition. I kept it off the visible books," I said. "Every dollar is accounted for, every tax properly filed. The appraisals are real and current. I just never updated the recorded values in the company's public-facing documents. There was never a reason to until now." He looked at the appraisals again. I watched him recalculate things he thought he already understood about the company he had helped run for 6 years. "The fire file," he said finally, "in the USB. In 2023, Hank pulled the original fire marshal's report," I said. "And the insurance claim documents. Marcus called the insurance company before he asked whether his son was hurt. The accelerant pattern in the report is consistent with a deliberate point of origin near the electrical panel. The cause was listed as undetermined because there wasn't enough physical evidence to prosecute. But there was enough to understand." Daniel set the papers down slowly. "Victor was the secondary beneficiary on that policy." I said. The porch was very quiet. "Everything in that box is yours now," I said. "You don't have to do anything with it tonight, but I need you to know where it is and what it means." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he reached across the table and put his hand on my arm, just above the wrist, and left it there. That was enough. The filing came on a Monday, September 29th, 2024. Maggie called me at 8:47 in the morning. I was at my desk reviewing the quarterly supply contracts, the same thing I had been doing on Monday mornings for 31 years. She didn't lead with pleasantries. "Patrick Doyle filed this morning," she said. "Formal contest of the will on behalf of Marcus Cole. Mental incapacity and undue influence. They're also requesting a 60-day continuance to gather additional testimony." I set down my pen. "Which judge?" "Honorable Catherine Brewer. She's thorough. This won't move fast. That's fine, I said. How long before the reading is formally scheduled? Given the contest filing, Brewer will want a preliminary hearing first. I can push for October 17th for the full reading. The contest doesn't stop the reading. It just means anything distributed is held pending resolution. Schedule October 17th. Ray. A pause. The in terrorem clause activates the moment Doyle's filing is recorded. I know. Marcus just forfeited his bequest. I know that too. She was quiet for a moment. You've been waiting for this. For about 18 months, I said. Make sure Hank's final report is hand-delivered to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office by end of week. Not filed hand-delivered, with a cover letter from your firm. Already drafted, she said. I hung up and looked out the window at the parking lot below. 2 of my drivers were loading a flatbed with structural steel for a site on the west side. They worked with the easy efficiency of people who had done the same job long enough to stop thinking about the individual movements. I had watched men load steel from this window for 22 years. I thought about Marcus sitting across from Patrick Doyle in some downtown office, convinced he had finally made his move, convinced that filing the contest was the moment the leverage shifted to his side. I wondered if Doyle had told him about the in terrorem clause. I wondered if Marcus had listened. The summer had not been quiet. Between June and September, Hank's surveillance team had logged 41 additional contacts between Marcus and Victor. The frequency had accelerated through August coffee meetings, became phone calls that became same-day texts. The pattern of people who believe a deadline is approaching and are running slightly behind their own schedule. Victor had made 3 attempts to access the company's financial archives through Patricia's credentials. Each attempt was logged, time-stamped, and added to the evidentiary file. The 3rd attempt, in late August, targeted the pension fund records. I had Ava move the actual pension documentation to an offline backup 2 weeks before Victor tried. What he accessed was a clean, formatted file that showed exactly what I wanted him to see. A company whose liquid reserves were significantly lower than reality. Patricia had performed without a single deviation from plan across 14 months. I thought about that sometimes, the discipline it required to play a role that long without overreaching. When I had asked her in the interview why she left her previous position, she had said she wanted to be close to decisions worth being close to. I had given her that. The decisions she had been close to had simply belonged to me, not Victor. In September, she came to me directly. She knocked on my office door on a Wednesday afternoon, sat down across from my desk, and told me she needed me to know something. Victor asked me last week to photograph the original will documents. If I could access them, she said. What did you tell him? That I would try, and I gave him the draft copy you told me to leave in the filing cabinet, the one dated March 2023. Good. She looked at her hands briefly. He's going to be angry when he finds out. Yes, I said. I want you to know that I understood what this was when I took the job. She said, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it out loud. I looked at her for a moment. There's a letter of recommendation in the top right drawer of that cabinet, I said. Signed and dated. It's been there since August. She didn't say anything. She stood up, opened the cabinet drawer, looked at the envelope, and closed the drawer without taking it. After the 17th, she said. After the 17th, I agreed. By October 10th, everything was in position. Hank's final report had been delivered. Diane Walsh had confirmed in writing through her own attorney that she would provide a voluntary statement. Ava had prepared the asset transfer documents for Daniel's signature. The sealed letter was in Maggie's briefcase, and the room behind the wall had been inspected twice. 7 days before the reading, I drove to the building alone. I parked in the back lot, let myself in through the side entrance, and sat in the hidden room for 45 minutes with the lights off. I wanted to know how it felt to wait in the dark before I had to do it for real. It felt like every other kind of waiting I had done in my life, like something that would eventually become the moment, just before everything changed. I drove home and slept better than I had in months. The room behind the wall was 8 feet by 6 feet. It had been a storage closet in the building's original 1987 floor plan, sealed during a 2019 renovation and removed from the current drawings at my instruction. The contractor who did the work had retired to Arizona 18 months later. The wall that covered the doorway was finished in the same material as the surrounding surface. The seam concealed behind a recessed shelving unit that held 3 binders no one had opened in 4 years. I arrived at 7:55. Maggie's paralegal had set a folding chair, a small thermos of coffee, and a legal pad inside the room the previous afternoon. I had asked for nothing else. The chair faced a 2-inch gap in the wall panel not visible from the conference room side. Sufficient for mine. I sat down, poured a cup, and waited. At 9:40, Daniel and Ava arrived together. I heard Daniel's voice first, something quiet to Ava, her response too low to catch. They took seats on the near side of the conference table. From the gap, I could see Daniel's profile and the back of Ava's head. He was wearing the same charcoal jacket he had worn to the Cook County Courthouse in 2009, when we finalized the adoption. I do not know if he remembered that. I did. Victor arrived at 9:56 alone. He took a seat on the far side without speaking to Daniel. He set a leather portfolio on the table and opened it to a blank page, which he did not write on. At 10:03, Marcus and Patrick Doyle entered together. I had not seen Marcus in person in 4 years. He was wearing a dark suit that fit well, the kind of suit you rent when you need to appear more substantial than you are. He was 58 years old, and he looked like a man who had spent the last 2 decades making small decisions that each felt justified at the time. He stood at the threshold for 3 seconds, surveying the room with the careful assessment of someone who believes they have walked into an advantage. He had not. Doyle set a briefcase on the table and arranged 3 documents in front of him with the practiced efficiency of a lawyer who expected to speak first. At 10:05, Maggie Chen entered, followed by her paralegal, who placed a laptop and an external screen at the head of the table. The screen faced outward toward the assembled parties. At 10:07, Diane Walsh entered quietly and took a seat near the door. Marcus saw her. A muscle in his jaw moved once. Doyle leaned toward him briefly. Marcus said nothing. At 10:08, Maggie called the proceeding to order. She read the preamble from the will document, the standard language establishing date, location, and the identity of the testator. Then she turned to the external screen and pressed play. My own face appeared. I had recorded the statement in February, on the same day as the psychiatric evaluation. I looked, I thought, reasonably well. I was seated at my desk at the Bridgeport office, the window behind me, showing a gray winter sky. I was wearing a blue shirt. I had not worn a tie. The recording ran 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I heard my own voice fill the conference room, and I sat very still in the chair behind the wall and listened to myself speak. I stated my full name and the date. I confirmed that I was making the statement voluntarily and without coercion. I described the company, its founding, its structure, its 47 employees, its 3 facilities. I described Daniel, his arrival, his adoption, his 18 years of work and growth. I described what I had built and why I had built it and who I had built it for. Then I described the disposition of assets, coal industrial supply, in its entirety, equity, contracts, physical facilities, equipment, and all associated intellectual property transferred to Daniel Cole upon probate. The Delaware LLC and all associated debt instruments transferred to Daniel Cole. The 3 warehouse properties, at their current appraised values, transferred to Daniel Cole, a funded educational trust, designated for Noah Walsh, to be administered independently. To Victor Huang, the termination of the consulting arrangement, effective immediately, with a formal referral of the financial records to the Cook County State's attorney. To Marcus Cole, $1. I heard Doyle's chair move. He said something to Maggie in a clipped tone. The word contest was audible. Maggie looked up from the document in front of her and said, in the same measured voice she had used for 22 years, Mr. Doyle, a formal contest was filed on September 29th. I'd ask you to note the date against the interim provision in Section 14, Paragraph 3. Doyle opened his mouth, closed it. Marcus was looking at the table. In the hidden room, I set down my coffee cup on the legal pad, stood up slowly, and placed my hand flat against the wall panel. 11 steps to the conference room door. I had counted them twice. The panel moved without sound. I had tested it 3 times in the preceding week. The mechanism was a simple pivot on a recessed hinge, the kind of detail that only matters if you intend to use it once. Under conditions where sound carries, it moved without sound. I stepped through. The conference room was bright. October light came through the east-facing windows in long, flat lines across the table. I had forgotten, in the dim of the hidden room, how much light there was in here. I took the 11 steps to the door and pushed it open. The silence that followed was the particular kind that arrives when a room full of people revises its understanding of a situation simultaneously. Daniel's head turned first. His expression moved through 3 things in the space of a second recognition. Relief. Something I did not have a name for, and then settled into stillness. Ava's hand found his forearm. Victor looked up from his portfolio. The pen he had been holding dropped onto the blank page. Marcus turned last. He turned the way a man turns when he has been hoping the sound behind him is something other than what it is. I walked to the head of the table and stood beside Maggie. "Good morning," I said. I apologize for the unusual entrance. Doyle recovered first, because that is what lawyers are paid to do. He straightened in his chair and said, "Mr. Cole, I want to note for the record that my client has filed a formal legal contest to these proceedings, and we intend to—" "Mr. Doyle," I said, "your client filed that contest on September 29th. Section 14. Paragraph 3 of the will document is the in terrorem clause. Any beneficiary who initiates a legal challenge forfeits their bequest in its entirety. Marcus Cole was listed as a beneficiary. He filed on September 29th. The clause activated on September 29th. I paused. He no longer has standing as a beneficiary, which means he no longer has standing to contest. Doyle's jaw tightened. That interpretation is arguable under Illinois. It was written by Maggie Chen, I said. She's been practicing Illinois probate law for 26 years. The language is not ambiguous. If you'd like to test it, the relevant case precedents are cited in the footnotes of Section 14. Page 31 of the document in front of you. Doyle looked at page 31. He did not speak again immediately. I turned to Victor. He was watching me with an expression I had seen before, not on Victor, but on other men who had miscalculated the distance between where they stood and where they thought they stood. It was a look of careful recalibration. "Victor," I said, "we've known each other for 28 years. He said nothing. The consulting arrangement through the Delaware shell entity, the one Patricia Solis, has been documented since August of last year, represents approximately $460,000 in improperly structured fees over 4 years. Hank Morrison's complete report, including financial analysis and communication logs, was hand-delivered to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office on October 11th. 6 days ago, Victor's face did not change, but his hand, flat on the table, pressed slightly harder against the surface. I noticed that. "The referral is already made," I said. "There's nothing in this room that changes that." The door opened quietly. Patricia Solis entered and took a position along the wall. She was carrying a single manila folder, which she placed on the side table without opening it. She did not look at Victor. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the table. Diane Walsh stood up. She had prepared a written statement, 2 pages, which she read in a clear and level voice. She stated that Marcus Cole had approached her in July 2023 with a request to present her son Noah as a potential heir to the Cole estate. She stated that he had represented the arrangement as a trust mechanism for Noah's benefit. She stated that she had subsequently learned the representation was false. She stated that Noah Walsh's paternity was documented. Marcus Cole had signed and then withdrawn a paternity acknowledgement, and that she was providing her statement voluntarily and without inducement. She sat down when she finished. She did not look at Marcus. Marcus had not moved in several minutes. He was looking at a fixed point on the table approximately 18 inches in front of him. Doyle leaned toward him twice. Marcus did not respond either time. After a long moment, Marcus pushed back his chair, stood, and buttoned his jacket with the slow, precise movements of a man who has decided that composure is the only thing left worth keeping. He walked to the door without speaking. Doyle gathered his documents, snapped his briefcase, and followed. The room exhaled. I stood at the head of the table and looked at the people who remained: Daniel, Ava, Maggie, Patricia, Diane, and felt something I had not expected to feel, which was not triumph, but something quieter and more durable. It felt like the last load-bearing wall holding up a structure I no longer needed. The room took several minutes to find its rhythm again. Maggie's paralegal collected the will documents and began the formal logging process signatures, timestamps, witness acknowledgments. The procedural machinery of estate law moves with the same indifference to drama as it does to everything else. Papers get signed. Copies get made. The record does not pause for the weight of the moment. I sat down for the first time since entering the room. Daniel was watching me from across the table, with an expression I recognized the same focused attention he had given supply contracts at 22. Equipment specifications at 25. The company's quarterly projections at 28. He was reading me the way he had learned to read anything that mattered, looking for the load-bearing elements. "How long have you been in that room?" he asked. "Since 7:55, I said. He nodded slowly. "You had coffee." Small thermos. Ava made a sound that was almost a laugh. It broke something loose in the room's remaining tension, and I was grateful for it. Patricia set the manila folder on the table in front of Maggie and sat down. The folder contained the complete IT monitoring log, 14 months of documented transmissions, access records, and time-stamped copies of every document Patricia had sent to Victor's personal address. Maggie opened it, reviewed the index page, and signed the receipt acknowledgement without comment. Patricia looked at me briefly. "There's one thing not in the log," she said. "I know," I said. She had come to my office in September and told me directly about Victor's request to photograph the original will. That conversation had not been captured by the monitoring system because it had happened in person, in my office, at Patricia's initiative. She had chosen to tell me directly rather than let it pass through the documented channel. That choice was not in the log because it was not a transaction. It was a decision. "The letter of recommendation is still in the drawer," I said. "I'll get it after," she said. She stood, straightened her jacket, and left the room with the quiet efficiency she had maintained across 14 months of doing one of the more difficult things a person can be asked to do: hold a position, day after day. That required her to be two things at once without becoming neither. Diane Walsh had not moved from her chair near the door. I crossed the room and sat down beside her. Noah's educational trust documentation was in a separate folder Maggie slid across to me. I handed it to Diane without ceremony. "This is fully funded and independently administered," I said. "It transfers to Noah unconditionally at 18. Nothing that happened today affects it in any direction." She looked at the folder for a moment. "He told me it was to protect him," she said. "About Marcus." The same words she had used in Wicker Park. I understood she needed to say them again, in this room, with the proceedings concluded. "I know," I said. He was going to put Noah's name in a court filing. She said it flatly. "The way you state something you have finished being angry about, and have not yet decided what to feel instead." "He was," I said. "He won't." She held the folder with both hands and looked at the trust documents for a long time. Her son was 10 years old and had spent his life without a father of record. That part of the story was not resolved by anything that had happened in this room. I knew that, She knew it better than I did. "Thank you," she said finally. "Take care of him," I said. She nodded and stood and left. I watched her walk down the corridor toward the elevator and thought about the two versions of a child's life that had existed in parallel for the last 17 years, Daniel's and the one Marcus had tried to manufacture for Noah, and the distance between them, which was the distance between being used and being chosen. Victor's shell consulting entity had been registered in Nevada in 2019 under a name that bore no surface connection to him or to Coal Industrial Supply. Ava had traced it in 11 days, using nothing more than public incorporation records and payment routing patterns. When I had asked her how difficult it was, she had said, "Not very." He wasn't expecting anyone to look. That was the problem with plans built on the assumption that no one is paying attention. They work until they don't. The state's attorney's referral covered 4 years of improperly structured fees, the attempted pension fund access, and the communication logs with Marcus. Maggie had attached a note to the referral cover letter describing Victor's 28-year role at the company, not to mitigate the conduct, but to provide context. She had asked me whether I wanted to include it. I told her yes. 28 years is not nothing. It does not excuse what came after. But it is real. And I had learned a long time ago that erasing what was real did not make you more honest. It just made you less accurate. By 1:15, the formal proceedings were complete. Maggie's paralegal had packed the documents. The external screen had been disconnected and carried out. The conference table held nothing now except a laptop, a water glass, and a white envelope in the center that Maggie had placed there 20 minutes ago without comment. Daniel was looking at it. "That's yours," I said. "But there's something else first." Ava slid a set of documents across the table toward him. The asset transfer authorization, 18 pages, covering the full disposition of Coal Industrial Supply, the 3 warehouse properties, the Delaware LLC, and the associated financial instruments. A pen was clipped to the top page. Daniel looked at the documents. Then he looked at me. "This is everything," he said. "Yes. You built this for 40 years. I built it so it would still be standing after 40 years, I said. "That's a different thing." He picked up the pen. The transfer took 18 minutes to execute. Each page signed, initialed, dated. Maggie witnessed. Her paralegal notarized. The machine of legal transfer moved forward with its customary indifference to the human weight of what was being passed from one set of hands to another. When the last page was signed, Daniel set the pen down and looked at the stack of documents in front of him. The white envelope was still in the center of the table. Maggie set her briefcase on the chair beside her and looked at me. "We'll give you some time," she said. She and her paralegal collected the remaining documents, the laptop, the signed transfer stack. The paralegal held the door. Maggie paused at the threshold and looked back once not at the envelope, at me, and then the door closed behind them, and the conference room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when everything that needed to happen in them has already happened. Daniel and I were alone. The white envelope was standard letter size. I had written his name on the front in the same handwriting I had used on every birthday card, every graduation card, Every note left on the kitchen counter for 17 years. Just Daniel. No last name. No formal address. He had only had the last name for 15 years, but I had been writing his name my whole adult life. He picked it up and turned it over once. "How long have you been carrying this?" he asked. "Since March," I said. "Maggie's been holding it since June." He nodded. He did not open it immediately. He set it flat on the table in front of him and looked at it the way he had looked at the cedar box on the back porch steadily, without rushing, as though giving the object time to be what it was before asking it to be something else. Then he opened it. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten. I had written it across 3 evenings in late February, after the psychiatric evaluation and after my conversation with Maggie about the adoption records. I had written 3 drafts before the final version. The first 2 were too careful, the kind of writing that spends so much effort not saying the wrong thing that it fails to say the right one. The final version said what it needed to say. I watched him read. The first page covered the adoption, not mine of him, but Harold and Evelyn's of me. I told him about the Cook County Courthouse in 1968, about being 7 years old and not fully understanding what the paperwork meant, except that it meant I was staying. I told him about Harold teaching me to weld in a garage on the south side, about Evelyn's insistence that I finish high school before I touched a wrench professionally, about the way they had given me their name without ever making me feel I had borrowed it. I told him that I wasn't Raymond Cole by birth. I was Raymond Cole because 2 people had chosen to make me so, and that the choosing, not the biology, was what had made the name mean something. He turned to the second page. The second page was about Marcus, not the scheme, not the legal strategy that was all in the USB drive, documented and evidenced. This was about the version of Marcus I had known before the pattern began, the younger brother who had followed me around the south side as a kid, who had borrowed my tools and never quite returned them, who had called me from a gas station in 1994 when his car broke down outside Joliet, and I had driven an hour each way without complaint. I wrote about the version of Marcus that had existed before the choices accumulated into the man who had sat across the table that morning. I wrote it, not to forgive him, I was clear about that, but because Daniel deserved to understand that the villain of the story had not always been a villain, that people become what they become gradually, through decisions that each seem small and each leave a mark. He turned to the 3rd page. The 3rd page was about Daniel himself, about the Friday night in August 2007 when I had opened the door and found an 11-year-old boy on the step with a canvas backpack and no explanation, about the way he had eaten the cereal the next morning, with the careful focus of someone who had learned not to take meals for granted, about every year after that, the warehouse work at 16, the engineering degree, the Monday morning he had walked into my office at 22 and asked for a job with the same directness he had shown every day since. I wrote that I had never once, in 17 years, thought of him as anything other than my son, not my adopted son, not my nephew's child, my son, and that the letter existed not because I needed him to know it. I believed he already knew it, but because some things deserve to be said in writing, in your own hand. So they exist in a form that does not depend on memory or interpretation, or the passage of time. He turned to the 4th page. The 4th page was short. 3 paragraphs. The first told him that Maggie had already filed the documentation, establishing his full legal standing as sole heir, with all challenges resolved. The second told him that the company's actual value, the $31 million, not the 8 that Marcus had planned against, was now his, cleanly and completely. The 3rd paragraph was 4 sentences. You came to my door with nothing, and you asked for nothing. You built everything you have. I gave you a name and a roof, and whatever I knew about steel and work and keeping your word. The rest was yours. Daniel set the letter down on the table. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was level but required a slight effort to remain so. You were adopted, he said. Yes. Harold and Evelyn. Yes. He looked at the letter again. You never told me. I'm telling you now. He was quiet for another moment. Does it change anything? He asked. Not defensively. Genuinely the question of a man working through the geometry of new information against a structure he had trusted for 17 years. No, I said. That's the point. He looked at me for a long moment across the table. Then he said, okay. It was the same word he had used at the kitchen table in 2008, when I had told him about the adoption proceedings. The same word, 16 years later, carrying the same weight it had carried then, not dismissal, not deflection, but the particular acceptance of someone who has decided that what they have is enough and does not require renegotiation. He folded the letter carefully along its original creases and slid it back into the envelope. I'm keeping this, he said. I know, I said. December comes to Chicago the way it always has without apology. By the first week of the month, the lake had gone the color of old iron, and the wind off the water carried the particular cold that residents of this city stop explaining to visitors, because explanation doesn't help. You either know what a Chicago December feels like in your bones, or you don't. After 64 years, I knew it the way I knew the weight of a steel beam and the smell of a warehouse in the early morning, not as information, but as fact. I had the surgery scheduled for January 14th. Doctor. Walsh had reviewed the October scans and told me the 18-month timeline had held closer than she had expected. The cancer had progressed, but remained contained. Surgery now, she said, carried a recovery window of 8 to 10 weeks, and a 5-year outlook she described as genuinely good. I had asked her to define genuinely good. She had said, the kind where you make plans. I told her I had some plans to make. On the 2nd Saturday of December, Daniel drove. We took the Eisenhower to the south side, exiting at the same interchange I had used for 30 years. Passing the same landmarks in the same order, the auto parts store on the corner that had changed owners 4 times without changing its sign. The church with the parking lot that flooded every spring. The block of 2 flats where Joe Briggs had lived until 2019. Daniel knew the route. He had ridden it enough times to know it without being told. We parked on a side street and walked in through the east gate. Harold and Evelyn Cole were buried side by side in the same section they had chosen together in 1987, when Harold had decided, with the particular practicality of a man who had spent his life solving problems before they arrived, that having the plot selected in advance was simply good planning. The headstones were modest names, dates, a single line each. Harold's read, "He built what he gave." Evelyn's read, "She made the name mean something." I had chosen those lines myself, years after the fact, when I finally understood what they had given me well enough to say it in a sentence. I stood between the two stones for a while. Daniel stood slightly behind me, the way he always positioned himself in spaces that belonged primarily to someone else present, attentive, not crowding the moment. "I've been coming here since 1991. I said. Harold died 3 weeks after I signed the Cermak Road lease. I came to tell him about it, and he was already gone. So I told the headstone instead. Daniel was quiet. I kept coming, I said. Evelyn until 2004, then both of them after. There were years I came once a month. There were years I came twice. I always talked more than I planned to." "What did you tell them?" Daniel asked. "Everything I was afraid to say out loud anywhere else." I said. "Company problems. Decisions I wasn't sure about. You, after a while. How you were doing. Things you'd said or done that I wanted someone else to know about." He was quiet for a moment. "Then did it help?" "Every time," I said. We drove back north along Lake Shore Drive. The lake was flat and gray and enormous, the same as it always was, indifferent to the season and the year and the particular human concerns being carried along its edge. Daniel had something he wanted to tell me. I could see it in the way he held the steering wheel both hands, which was not his habit. "Ava is pregnant," he said. I looked at him. 11 weeks, he said. "We've been waiting to be sure before we said anything." I did not say anything for a moment. The lake moved past the window. The city held its shape against the gray December sky. "How does she feel?" I asked. "Good," he said. "Nervous." "Good. And you?" He glanced over briefly. Like something I didn't know I was waiting for just became real. I understood that feeling. I had felt it in October 2009 in a Cook County courtroom when a clerk had handed me a document with both our names on it. The feeling of a future becoming specific. "We've been talking about names," he said. "Have you decided?" He was quiet for a beat. "If it's a boy," he said. "We want to name him Joe." I looked at the road ahead. Joe Briggs had taught me to weld in 1981. He had told me that steel doesn't break. It bends and comes back. He had died in the winter of 2021 at 83 years old, in the same South Side neighborhood where he had spent his entire life, having never once, in 40 years of knowing me, asked for anything he hadn't earned. I had spoken at his funeral and used more words than I intended to, and still felt afterward that I hadn't said enough. "Joe," I said. "Joe," Daniel said. That evening, I went to the workshop behind the garage. The cedar box was on the workbench where I had left it in June. Empty now, its contents transferred to Daniel's care. The USB and the documents and the architectural drawings all in his possession. I had kept the box itself. I opened it and placed 2 items inside. The first was a letter I had written that afternoon, addressed to Noah Walsh, to be opened when he turned 18. It told him about the trust, how it had been funded, and why, and something about the kind of man I hoped he would choose to become, given that no one had made that choice easy for him. I told him that the circumstances of how you arrive in the world matter less than what you do once you understand you are in it. The second item was a photograph Daniel at 16, standing in the Thermac Road warehouse in a coal industrial supply work shirt 2 sizes too large, holding a clipboard and squinting at a supply manifest with the concentrated focus of someone who has decided that whatever this is, he is going to understand it completely. I closed the lid. The workshop was quiet and smelled of cedar and machine oil, the same as it always had. Outside, the wind was doing what Chicago wind does in December. Inside, it was warm and still, and I was 64 years old, and I had a surgery scheduled for January, and a son who was going to name his child after a welder from the South Side. And somewhere across the city, a 10-year-old boy had a trust fund that would open on his 18th birthday, regardless of everything that had tried to prevent it. I sat on the workbench stool for a while, not doing anything in particular. There is a version of a life where what you build is measured by what you accumulate. Square footage, revenue, the number of trucks in the lot. I had spent enough years in that version to know its dimensions precisely. There is another version where what you build is measured by what remains standing when you are no longer there to hold it up. Not because you engineered it to be permanent, but because you chose, at every point where the choice was available, to build it out of something real. Harold Cole had known that. Evelyn Cole had known it. Joe Briggs had known it in the language of steel and heat and a good weld that holds. I had spent 64 years learning to know it in my own language. The name on the building was mine. The name on the boy would be Joe's. The name in the letter would be Daniel's. Names are not what you're given. They are what you make worth carrying. I turned off the workshop light and went inside. If this story stayed with you, if you saw something in Ray that reminded you of someone you know, or something you've carried yourself, leave a comment below. And if you believe the people who raised you deserve to be remembered, share this with someone who would understand why. Subscribe if you want more stories about the kind of quiet that comes after you've done what needed doing.